Hey, Krishna. Got your haircut. Can you hear me? Oh, oh. I have my AirPods on. Are you there? Anybody hear me?
All right. Yeah, we got everybody here. All right. Raisa, you are... Okay, great. Thanks. I'm the host now. So we're good to go. Let's see who we've got. We've got Krishna, we've got Howard, we've got Frank. Tanya emailed and said that she was not going to be able to join for the full meeting. And I think we're waiting on Karen. Ian, David told me she was not going to be able to join. So let's give, we don't have a quorum yet. So let's wait for Karen or Ian. Great.
Hey, Matt, real quick, I'm gonna hang up, which we
Yep.
haven't done before. If you run into any other problems, shoot me a text and I'll jump back on.
Yep, that sounds great. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Rice. Appreciate it.
Yeah, yep.
All right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we do have a quorum. Hey everybody, good to see you all. It's Dumphead night, so we got a bunch of updates, and I am going to let's see, how do I? Sorry about this. How do we go live? I'm so sorry. I've done this a million times now, I feel like. Frank, any guidance here? I'm trying to have the participants join us.
You know, I haven't run a meeting in about 3 years, so I'm very rusty. Krishna.
Oh, here we go. Here's our participants. Are we live? I don't think we're live. Okay, let's do this. It looks like we've got everybody. We got everybody here. And Karen may have Risa may have made the meeting live before she left, which she may have had to do before she handed it over. So excellent. With that said, and with my awkward launch of the May Economic Development Committee meeting for Commission 1B, I call the meeting to order at 7:03. Good to see you all, and thank you all for being here tonight. I will do a quick roll call as we establish our quorum and begin, and then I'm going to turn it to Krishna for a couple of welcoming comments. Krishna Kumar, Vice Chair. It's all right, here or present.
I think we're having a hard time hearing him tonight.
Krishna, you're muted still. Okay, I see you. I'm just toggling between documents. Frank Chauvin.
Here.
All right, Howard Kurtzman.
Here.
Ian Hawksworth.
Here.
All right, there we go. Karen Gall is not here. David Martin emailed and said that he would not be able to be here, as did Tanya Shand. We do have a quorum. We are called to order. And before we begin our formal meeting, Krishna, I'm going to turn it over to you to make some remarks.
All right. Is this any better? Can folks hear me?
Can hear you loud and clear now. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I have unfortunately some sad news to share. I shared it with the committee members. I wanted to just share it with the larger community. Former ANC Commissioner Rob Hudson has died recently, apparently about 2 weeks ago. He had been a commissioner for 1B11 before we were redistricted. If you can kind of picture it, that's no longer in our ANC. He lived in the Florida condominiums on right on Florida, right near the Whole Foods, and represented that area, which is now part of 1B, 1E. While he was on the committee, he worked extensively on the Grimkey site and also on the Terrell, which is a short-term family housing. So I think the only other person on this committee who worked with Rob was probably Tanya. Frank, you might have had some interactions with him. I don't recall if you were around during the Grimkey days, but I just wanted to take a moment and thank Rob for his service. He did an amazing job, especially through the pandemic, of getting this going. Our committee meetings were not always well attended. Sometimes it was just myself and Rob listening to Patrick on the Grimkey site. On the positive news, we had talked to Patrick a few weeks ago, and the Grimkey site is opening up. It's finally done. So that chapter has truly closed, and we're all very grateful for the work that Rob did.
Thank you, Krishna, and I think it's a good opportunity to recognize and celebrate the fact that all the work that all of us does is based on the hard work of the people that came before us, and we're hoping to do hard work to help people who follow us, and it's just a big continuum, and appreciate the contributions of everybody, but in particular our former chair. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for recognizing all the great things that he did. We've got a couple of quick update items, and then we're going to turn to the real meat of our presentation. I'm going to try to keep our old business items brief. It's DemPed night. We're very grateful for Daniel Lyons, for Vanita for being here. If you both, Daniel, I think I see you, so I'm going to promote you to panelist because you're going to be presenting here in just a moment. So you should be able to come on here in just a moment. Vanita, if you don't mind raising your hand, I don't yet see you. Oh, good. There's Tanya. Hey, Tanya. Great to see your face. Thank you for joining. But Vanita, oh, there you are. Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to promote you to panelist as well. So both of you should be coming on here in just a moment, as you'll be our main DemPed presenters. A couple of quick things. First, this is just kind of a public service announcement for all of our business owners on U Street. We are hosting our inaugural U Street Business Roundtable next week, Thursday, the 22nd of May at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Whitlow's has been generous enough to sponsor hosting the event, so we'll be meeting there. I'll be reaching out to folks, as will Francois Berrial, as will Sable Harris and Miguel Trindade Duramo over the course of the next couple of days to make sure that we've got folks there. Commissioner Pulliam, the 3rd District, will be joining us to talk about the traffic management issues and questions that people have been raising. We'll also be hearing from DPW and be able to engage them on traffic management and street cleaning along the U Street corridor. So I'm hoping for a good, productive dialogue back and forth. And so looking forward to that meeting, and we'll be certain to give an update to this group when we reconvene again in a month, and probably a very brief update at the Commission 1B meeting. Howard.
Yeah, is this an activity of this committee or an activity of the ANC? Second question is, since it is related to economic development, are we invited? I'm a little unclear about that.
Yeah, so I mean, there's probably two answers to your first question. The first is maybe not an answer as much as an excuse, which is I'm still new to the role, and so I'm not sure I fully appreciate the difference between the Commission and the Economic Development Committee sponsorship. I think our hope was that since this was a part of trying to advance economic development along U Street, that our committee would be the sponsor of the Business Roundtable, rather than having it be kind of a full commission activity. But as you might imagine, it's been a lot of collaboration with Francois Barriot, who represents 1B02, where there are a lot of the U Street businesses, with Sable Harris, our vice chair, as her single member district includes a lot of the businesses. So it's been a real collaborative effort amongst the commissioners. But as it moves forward, I think the thinking is that economic development is going to have a role in shaping that. To your second question, the members of the Economic Development Committee are welcome to attend. It's not going to be an open public meeting. We want to give an opportunity for some very candid conversation between business owners themselves, but also between business owners and the agencies. The goal here is to have some honest problem solving and dialogue and digging into issues that folks have. And so for that reason, we're not making it a wide open public meeting. But members of this committee, if they would like to join, are certainly welcome. And if I've not yet forwarded the final logistics information to this group, I will do that tonight. Does that answer your question?
It does. I'm still wondering, so who did get invited? Who in the business community got invited?
Basically everybody who has a business on U Street. We literally had teams of folks walking up and down the street, stopping into businesses. We've been emailing various people that we have relationships with. We've been asking them to invite their colleagues. We had the Mayor's Office of Nightlife emailed their whole distribution list of businesses. We had another business organizer in the community email their distribution list. And so we've done what we can do to reach out to as many people as we can. That said, I will say that there's probably a lot of folks in the business community who are saying, gosh, I'm pretty busy. And so I'm not sure if this is worth my time. So we appreciate that we may have to prove ourselves in terms of the value of a roundtable like this. And this is the first inaugural meeting, and so we expect that there's going to be some degree of learning curve.
Thank you.
Frank, I see your hand, and then Krishna.
Yes, so a few things, Commissioner. I'd like to say, one, that I believe ABCA should be at the table. The ABCA director, I don't know, but I think you attended the last meeting held at the Lincoln Theater, sponsored by Gene Hamza and the 930 Club.
Yeah.
There's a set of deliverables that may or may not have been forthcoming, but that would be, of course, that set, it might be 5 issues that would be important to carry on and to show that, this conversation started there and we're now continuing it. Specifically, there is an outstanding deep issue that this entire community, all business owners, all bars, all restaurants know about, and that is the illegal sales of alcohol up and down U Street, 9th Street, 7th Street, sales out of the back of cars, sales from little side stands, sales from tables. These people are coming just to party on the streets. This is a known fact. This needs to go away. It needed to go away last year. It needed to go away the year before. All right. This is a primary issue competing with every single business up and down the corridor. All right. And no one is taking this seriously. And just so I'll take another minute and a half here. There is in the code, in the alcohol code, it says that ABCA shall approach illegal sales. However, illegal sales of alcohol, if you're not licensed, whatever, whatever, not abiding by the code, selling alcohol without a license. It doesn't say if you're indoors. Therefore, maybe if you have, a commercial establishment that you're in and not licensed, it doesn't say whether you're outdoors vending from an illegal table, car, whatever. There's no accountability here, okay? And this is a well-known fact, and I just ask that we add this to the top of the list and that ABCA be invited to this meeting. It's important to Ms. Hamza, I know that, because she's iterated it at her last meeting, and we're not getting an answer. ABCA refuses to take any responsibility, and they the code says that they shall refer such violations, APCA shall, to the OAG. Well, we know how that works, Matt. You, Commissioner, you and I know about that back and forth and how well that works. However, it's ambiguous, and APCA is not taking responsibility. I've had a conversation with the commander about this. The commander says he'd be happy to organize such an approach to deal with it. However, we're short 600 policemen. That's a non-starter to me. That's oh, here we are one day. This is a full charge issue that needs to go to the top, because it's not a policing issue at this point. We need the council, we need ABCA, we need resources, and it's not coming from police. We can't even keep crime off the streets because we don't have enough policing, because we're not properly funding, we're not paying, and nobody wants to do it because they can't do their job. Another side point. However, I'm done. I just want that issue to the top, and I wanted to provide some substantiation and reasoning and history bringing to the table in support of our businesses that are competing with all this illegal activity because they're partying on the streets and they're not going into bars. I just had a conversation the last week with one of my neighbor commercial establishments.
Yeah. So let me say this, Frank. You've made excellent points. I'm tempted to say I agree with all of them, but I'm sure there are a couple that we debate. But I generally agree with what you're saying. The goal of this roundtable, it's inspired by Jean Hamza. I mean, everybody here knows Jean Hamza, and the event that she created or hosted at the Lincoln Theater about 4 to 6, maybe 8 weeks ago at this point. And the event she hosted, for those of you who were not able to attend, I thought was incredibly well done. And one of the things that she did is that she invited essentially everyone that you could imagine from DC government who has a role in improving the livelihood and the safety and the cleanliness and the success of U Street to this event. And one of the things that I reflected on, with absolutely zero criticism of Jean, is that by the time each of the individual government agencies got done talking, there wasn't much time left to dig in and roll up sleeves and to think about solution generating and finding and conversing. And so the goal or the format of this roundtable is to say, let's pick a couple of things that we can get deeper into. Let's meet on a monthly basis. In month one, let's cover some known topics that we know have already been raised, in part at Jean's event at the Lincoln Theater, in part at the public safety walk that Deputy Mayor Appia joined and hosted. And let's start to tackle a couple of those items. Let's hear from the businesses about what the next pressing issues are. And Frank, I think that what you described in terms of alcohol sales on the street and kind of what is and isn't being done about that is going to very quickly rise to the top and will very likely be part of the June discussion, and ABCA will be invited to be there along with perhaps representatives from the OAG to be able to talk about those specific issues. But one of the goals here is that we want to, and remember, I guess I sometimes have to say this, right? I'm brand new to elected life, right? I'm a consultant. And so I kind of look at problems and I say, let's solve them, right? Let's not kind of heap more problems on problems. Let's look at the problems that we've got in front of us. Let's figure out what we can do to solve them. And let's make some progress as we're teeing up the next set of issues that we got to tackle. And so that's the spirit of this. And at the same time, everything that you just went through, I think needs to get on the agenda. Definitely needs to get on the agenda. So I'm going to go to Krishna, and then Jean Hamza, I see your hand up, so I'm going to impanel you. But Krishna will go first, and then you'll be up next.
Can folks hear me now?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, I think you answered 95% of my questions. So I just have 2 points. One is just to confirm time, 1:00 p.m. at Whitlow's. Okay.
1 p.m. Thursday the 22nd, Whitlow's. You got it.
And two is I sent you a private message. I know that you've been busy. You may need to promote Daniel Lyons to panelist, and also David Menny is here as well.
Great. Daniel Lyons, I promoted you twice. So let me try it one more time. And David Many, I'm promoting you as well. So just see if that works. David Many is rejoining as a panelist. So David's on. I see that Vanita is here because I promoted her. Jean Hamza, why don't you go ahead while we're waiting to get Daniel Lyons bumped up to presenter?
Well, I just I heard everything Frank said, and we've brought that up. The issue around the illegal sales is that ABRA says that they cannot regulate anything they don't license. So they're not licensing the guy on the street. It's an issue around the house parties. So this becomes a legislative issue in the sense that, yes, it's illegal, but it's only a misdemeanor. And that's pretty appalling, considering if an ABC establishment was selling alcohol out of the back of their establishment or something, they'd be shut down, they'd lose their license, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's pretty extreme inequity around this issue. So I know this is a big issue for us. The businesses would like to see the street party go away, but I am kind of waiting to see what Deputy Mayor Apia has been able to get implemented. And I guess we really need to have a conversation with Commander Pulliam. But I do want to say, and it just, so the roundtable, I didn't really realize it was going to be a monthly thing. I think the businesses are kind of like, what is this about? If we inundate them with a lot of, ABCA's going to be there and so-and-so is going to be there and all these residents and, I mean, I don't even want to go. Does that make sense? If you're trying to engage the businesses, then
Yeah.
let's engage the businesses around,
Yeah.
what do they need? And I'm talking about the small businesses on U Street that are absolutely struggling, from the Economic Development Committee. So that's kind of all I have to say. But I mean, it's hard to get businesses together, and the first thing you don't want to do is scare them off.
I mean, Gene, the goal, and you and I have spent a lot of time talking about this. The goal is that this is a non-public meeting. The ANC is helping to facilitate bringing folks together. And the goal is to have the business leaders spend time, or the business owners spend time together with one another, and then also being able to have direct conversations with district agency leads who can make a direct impact on their success.
Understood. I understand, and I'm not saying that. I just like at this first meeting, I don't think Fred Masali should be there, and I mean we should hear what they need to. We need, I just think that's like a lot. And if you say, hey, we're inviting Fred, I think a lot of businesses want to show up, but then that would be the agenda.
That's right.
So
And I don't think we're ready for that.
And neither, I don't know, like the agenda has to be establishing what's this roundtable about.
That's right.
My opinion. Anyway, I hear you, Frank, 100%. And I just don't think this meeting is the first meeting is the meeting for Fred Masali to be there. End of all I have to say. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Gene. All right. Any other questions on this topic? Otherwise, I'm going to transition to Howard Kurtzman to provide an update on the vacant properties.
Sure. I'll be very brief because I know we have other topics to cover. Just to talk about two things, a forthcoming bill that's working its way through council, and the vacant property caucus. For the last few years, there's been quite a bit of interest in having DC government address the longstanding and wide-ranging and complex problem of vacant and blighted properties, of which there are thousands in the district. Chair Mendelson has introduced a bill called the Vacant to Vibrant Amendment Act, He actually introduced it in 2024, and then there was a hearing and got reintroduced early this year. And it looks like the bill is close to being passed. It has more than a majority of council members as co-sponsors. I believe it went to the committee of the whole earlier this week. I don't know what happened, but I didn't hear that there were any problems that arose. So it could be voted on by the full council as early as next month. And that law, if it's goes into effect, has multiple provisions, both sticks and carrots to encourage the development of vacant and blighted properties. And it's a pretty ambitious and well thought out bill. So that's something for us to pay attention to. Assuming it gets passed, we'll want to follow the implementation of it. So that's actually sounds like it'll be good news. Also, as many of you know, since the beginning of 2024, there's been a vacant property caucus composed of mainly ANC commissioners, also some liaisons from ANCs. I've been the liaison from ANC1B. It's chaired by Jeremy Sherman of ANC1A and Chuck Elkins of ANC3D, which is in Wesley Heights. And about somewhere between, say, 15 and 25 people attend each meeting. They happen, I think, roughly quarterly. And although there's a core group that attends every meeting of just a few members, including myself, we've been hearing updates and having discussions with DC government staff who are involved with vacant properties. We've had discussions with Phil Mendelson's staff about the legislation, and we've been looking at case studies of problematic vacant properties throughout the district, learning how they've been dealt with and what more can be done, kind of engaging in some problem solving with the government staff. I think as a next step, we're talking about putting together a guide based on what we've learned for ANC commissioners and other residents of DC, basically on what to do about a vacant property in your neighborhood. You know, what office to go to, what to ask for, what are the relevant laws and regulations. So that's something that I think we'll be working on this year. So that's a very quick overview of what's been going on in the vacant property space. Frank, you have a question?
Yes, I don't believe we touched on this before, Howard, because I wasn't aware, but there's vacant land that is a nuisance. 1900 block of 9th Street, several of you on this call probably are aware of a vacant lot where there's loitering, contributing to drug sales, you know, and I don't believe anything in this law, I think, am I correct, that would help or assist for higher taxes on vacant land that could be considered a nuisance for
Frank, vacant property refers both to empty lots and buildings and land that has buildings on it.
That's
Everything applies where relevant to both empty lots and buildings.
That's not how a DOB person, Department of Buildings, explained it to several of us on this call at the T Street Task Force over the last 3 months. But I would appreciate, Howard, if you found out a little more about that, because I'm fairly certain it doesn't.
I'll look into it, but the database, the Department of Buildings database on vacant properties designates whether it's an empty lot or there's a building there.
Yeah, but if you go and look, there's no higher assessments in a chart for that vacant land. So I'm pretty certain that's correct, but happy to carry on with this.
Okay, I'll look into it.
What if we do this in interest of the DemPed presentations?
Yep.
Howard can dig in a little bit. Frank, I heard something similar from DOB, but I know there's a lot of moving pieces, and Howard will find the answer. Good. Howard, thank you so much for being our representative for the commission on this. Really, really appreciate it. All right, we are going to transition to our. Oh, sorry, David Menny did make a comment in the chat that the bill did go before the committee. The chief financial officer of the district had not had the opportunity to complete the financial analysis, and so it was not going to be moving forward. this month, but it sounds like it's very much on people's radars and a little bit more work to be done in pinning down the financials. All right. So with that said, Vanita, Daniel Lyons is here, Krishna. He is, I think, waiting to come on as a panelist when his two properties are up, which I respect, given that we're all kind of balancing different schedules. But Vanita is our representative from DemPed, who has been leading the effort on the Reeves Center. And so we're going to look forward to an update from her on the Reeves Center redevelopment. I know a lot of folks have showed up tonight, which is great. I love that the Economic Development Committee has so many people who come to it. And frankly, I would love for all of you to email us with things that you would like to see on the agenda. DemPed being here tonight is the result of several members of the community asking for updates on these different redevelopment projects. I'm going to kind of start by saying that DemPed is not going to have every single one of the answers that we would like to get tonight. There's a lot of things that are in the works. There's a lot of effort that's going on. There are certain things that they're working on that, they're waiting on other parts of the district. And so what I'm going to ask is that we, ask the questions that we need to ask. Let's capture those questions. Let's make sure that we're all tracking them and we're sharing them with DemPed. But I also want to appreciate that that this is a process that takes some time. That DemPed is working hard at this, and that where they don't have an answer immediately tonight, we're going to make sure we capture the question and we'll kind of work together to follow up on them. But I don't want that to be a source of frustration with folks because I know they are working hard. It just takes time with these very complicated deals to move through. And we appreciate them being here tonight to share with us updates that they've got. The way we're going to structure this is that Vanita is going to share an update on the Reeves Center. We're going to pause. We're going to have a community question and answer. Then we're going to move to 1617 with Daniel Lyons. He's going to give an update. We're going to pause, question and answer from the community. And then we'll close out with Rita Bright. And then if we have other business, we'll turn to that. And so with that said, Vanita, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Fay, and thank you, committee members. Just get an update on the Reeves Center. So we continue to work with our development partner, negotiate the terms of the land disposition and development agreement. This is the agreement that outlines the terms of the deal and transfers the development rights to the selected developer. Once we are complete with this, this is what goes to council for their review, markup, and hearing, and for approval. Given the economic environment, the developer and the district, we're continuing to assess the project feasibility and available public subsidies. So this complexity has increased our time needed to move through these negotiations. As Commissioner Fay said, it's fairly complex deal, and particularly for this building and lot. As the Reeves today, most of the tenants have vacated, but we do still have a small group of staff member that's occupying the building. DDOT remains. We have a team there, as well as some temporary uses by DGS. For example, FEMS relayed that they had a need for a temporary office, and so they provided space for that, as well as, miscellaneous uses such as the city administrator needing storage for World Pride. So, and with that, Octo is also working within the building to relocate the traffic control network. And that will be tied to a separate project of building out the new location, which they will then move the equipment over and then fully decommission the building. And then that's when the last couple groups will vacate the building. DGS continues to operate the building. There's still, on-site security. Parking garage will be open to the public for the foreseeable future. So, that's our intent to have a presence there. So that's kind of the overview, and I'll open this up to any questions.
Can maybe just start with a couple of basic questions. So if you were to lay out rough timeline, and I appreciate that you don't have a sorry, give me 1 second. I was trying to sign in to get my timer going for community questions, but you might just have to folks will have to bear with my cell phone as the timer. If you think about the rough timeline and maybe the rough next steps, rough next steps might be easier than timeline, but you will finalize the agreement for the disposition of the land. Then it would be handed over. Then it would go through the whole permitting process. Maybe there's a question about whether there's a zoning step in between, but as folks kind of think about the cycle of steps, that probably gives us a little bit of a sense as to the timing.
Yeah, to kind of dig into that more. So once we come to agreement on the terms of the land disposition agreement, we will prepare a council package, and that'll go through the full legislative cycle, which has a couple of steps within it. And that is what will be presented to the council. They'll mark up, vote to have a hearing, and that's also a point in time where the public will be able to see the documents and testify at the hearing if they're interested. So we do have those steps in place to get feedback from the community. Should the council vote to approve on it, then that will allow the developer to have site control, and they will advance the design through having a fully realized design package. And those also consist of steps along the ways, community meetings, and so forth. And that will also include pursuing any zoning action, and that is anything related to zoning commission or the BZA, given this, the size of the site and the complexity of it. And then from that point, once the design is done and priced, then they will have to pursue financing. And that financing will need to be secured in order for them to break ground. So, we hope to have a package to council by the end of this year. And, if we're able to meet that milestone, I would say that if we have a hearing by the end of 2025, groundbreaking would likely be in like 2028.
Got it. That's super helpful. And I think that gives folks a couple of kind of thoughts around when to be paying attention to the council hearing, that we're not going to see groundbreaking anytime soon, and that there will be an opportunity for the community to be able to provide feedback when the package is presented to council. So that's helpful. Krishna, I see your hand is up, and sorry, I have to go back to the community as well to make sure I'm watching hands there.
Yes.
So Krishna, go ahead.
Two quick questions. Number one, maybe I missed it. Did we talk about the parking garage and what are the plans for the parking garage?
Yes.
And two, just if you can just remind us for the RFP and for what was submitted, is this going to be a fee simple project, or are you planning on ground leasing the Reeve Center site?
So for the first question, the garage will remain open and in operation, available to the public. Our intent and DGS is to keep that open as long as possible, since we know that's a highly valued amenity for the community. And for the RFP, in terms of whether it's fee simple or ground lease, that's something that's being assessed as part of the negotiations. So I can't speak to what that will end up until later on.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the committee? Okay. And then maybe one other question, and we'll, Vinita, thank you for being here, and we'll continue to work with you to make sure that the community is up to date. When you release the package, that has a public notice, I'm assuming, that goes with it. So when it gets transmitted to council for review, there's a public notice. We'd be able to pick up that public notice and share it with our community so that people are aware.
Yes. Once it goes through the legislative process, like any resolution that goes through, there'll be a public notice for the hearing, and similar to others, they can sign up and provide testimony and be able to look at documents once they're published.
Okay, that sounds good. And then you would like to invite us to look over your shoulder during these negotiations, or more of a wait and see? And So I think if at this point there's no opportunity for public comment, but I know that there were previous opportunities for public comment on the
Right,
structure.
yes, and we, you know, with our development partner, we told them how involved the, this particular ANC is, and our local, CBD partner, CSG Urban has worked in the neighborhood and, you know, are familiar with faces and names, and so we've given them heads up of, you know, people are very interested and involved, so if there's any, movement or you're at a point where you're prepared to provide an update, they'll, you know, they won't hesitate to, reach out.
That sounds good. Great. Good. I see a question from the community. Give me a second, Arlene. Okay, Arlene, you can talk.
Oh, here we go. Okay. I just want to know where in the process does the RFP occur? Has that already occurred, or is that package that you were talking about?
Yeah, so to differentiate, the RFP did occur in 2022, and we awarded the project to a team called CMC Reeves. They are consisted of Capri Investment and CSG Urban, which is a local group here, and MRP.
You said CSG?
Yes, CSG Urban
Okay.
and MRP. So they are our development partner that we're working with on this project. And the package that I had referenced earlier, we put together a package of documents that outlines the terms of the deals. And that is what goes to council for review and their vote.
Okay, so that, yeah, okay. So the RFP has already been, that gets voted on by the council or the mayor's? That gets voted on by you, right? DEMPED?
No, so the package for the disposition of saying, hey, you know, this is, we're going to turn this into XYZ, that'll be voted on by the council.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Thanks, Arlene. Other questions from the community? Okay. Vanita, thank you. And as we have questions, we'll reach out and we'll make sure. I see Ian's hand up. We'll reach out. We'll make sure we ask questions. We'll stay in touch with you around the timeline. We'll make sure that we are announcing or sharing whatever information we can as soon as something that gets presented as a package, and make sure that we keep folks in the loop. But thank you for being here with us tonight. One more question, I think, before you go on this topic. Ian, go ahead. And you're muted. There you go.
Thanks very much. Vanita, thanks very much for that update. So in general, I'm very interested in how this these kind of major projects impacts the community, and I wanted to hear if you were with the city in 22 and what how did you work to sort of galvanize opinion and get input from the community in the RFP process?
So I was not with the district in 2022, but my colleague Patrick Smith, who this commission is very familiar with, led the helm at that time.
Okay.
And I think Krishna was also around during that time. And so there was a number of meetings to prepare the RFP and get the community input. We actually had two RFPs. We had one in 2021 and then another that was released in 2022 to incorporate some of that community feedback. And so Patrick still is at DIMPED, so I actually go and talk to him pretty often to get historical information and just some background and feedback on his part. So though I was not there at the early part of the process, I do have close access to the people who were.
Okay, so in other words, there was a structured sort of community engagement process, which
Correct.
where you got input and it was taken into account, and it was as important as part of the development of the RFP. Is that fair to say?
Yes. So
Okay.
it was taken into account community feedback. For example, I think there was a request for a hotel. We didn't have that originally. We incorporated that into the second RFP. And then when we received the proposals from the bidders, they each had presentations to the community of their proposal for the for the site. And so that was a meeting that was open to the community to gain feedback, to gain questions, concerns. And that was also with the developer that was present as well.
No, very good. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, and I think yeah, I mean, David Meny, you're welcome to also verbalize that if you'd like to, in terms of attesting to the level of engagement the community had. I think, Ian, your question is leading us in the direction of where I know many people here tonight are joining around the 16-17 update. Krishna, maybe what would be helpful, if you don't mind, is just to take a couple of minutes to say, yeah, here's how that process worked. Obviously, I wasn't involved in those conversations. But do you have kind of a couple of bullets that you'd share in terms of how that community engagement process, what it looked like, how it worked relative to the Reeve Center?
Yeah, I mean, so as Vinita said, what was unusual here is we actually had two RFPs. So the initial RFP was issued, and the ANC Economic Development Committee, I think, had 2 or 3 meetings based on that. And we had come out with a recommendation that had gone to the city. And I don't quite remember the period of time there, but after a couple of months, the city came back and said, basically, and Vinita, correct me if I'm wrong here, we want a hotel on the site. That changed some of the numbers on it. So we had an additional few meetings to try to come up with our final recommendation. So, you know, when people say there was a back and forth, yeah, there was a tremendous back and forth on that. You know, clearly the DEMPED was very much listening to the concerns. I mean, this is where I learned what DEMPED does on these calls, is they take notes on every single thing that you say and reference it later. It's kind of terrifying. But that's actually what they're doing, is trying to capture, and that when they say capturing that feedback, that's what they mean. So we definitely appreciated that. You know, I think some of the issues that we had is some of the things in the RFP we didn't always agree with, and that was always a subject of some contention, and we did have a few disagreements and different views on the city on that, you know, and it's that's always a difficult one to resolve.
Great. Thanks. And David, who I think is David Meny from the council member's office, who's probably juggling a couple of things, also kind of stated in the chat that he can attest to the extensive and structured engagement process that that the ANC participated in. And so I can't speak to it. I wasn't involved in it, but I appreciate what you all did. And I think there's a lot of folks tonight who are looking for a similar, you know, well-structured and extensive engagement process around 16-17. So nice to know that that Reeve Center, you know, provided a template of sorts that we were able to learn from and that we can follow again. So good. Sorry, we got two more questions in the audience. Let me just go to them really quickly. Arlene, since you spoke, I'm going to go to Jerry Johnson first, and then I'll come back to you, Arlene. But Jerry, you should be able to speak once you unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
We can, yeah, thanks.
My question is actually in the Q&A. My concern is the legality of the equity RFP and the race-based requirements that were part of that RFP. This disposition, I believe, will need to go before, or it will have the typical congressional approval requirement, as all DC legislation has. And I'd hate to see this project move all the way to that point and find a challenge to the legality of the project, either by someone or by members of Congress, or by someone who feels that they were excluded from the process. So I'm curious, Vinita, if you have looked into this issue, and that's my question.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair question and concern. You know, that's on the top of the mind of all of our project team members, you know, specifically when we're trying to do a building that commemorates and speaks to the history of Black Broadway and the history in this of the Reeve Center when it was first built in the 80s, and also having an anchor tenant that is the National Association for NAACP. That is something on the top of the mind, and then also being at the forefront of sustainability. I don't have an answer for you, but we talk about it at every meeting, and we're working to see how we can delicately progress this forward, and then also present it in a way that is most conducive for moving things along. So I mean, that's definitely on top of our mind. Thank you, Jerry.
Great. Thanks, Jerry, and thanks, Benita. Arlene, go ahead.
Quick question. The community engagement, is that coordinated through the ANC, or is that done separately in another type of forum?
We'll coordinate with the ANC.
So basically the ANC is coordinating all that community engagement. So we would look towards our ANC to engage.
Yeah, it depends on which phase of it, but we always include the ANC, so they are our conduit for making announcements of when meetings are going to happen and so forth, whether they happen at the same time as the monthly meetings or so.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. And Arlene, our commitment is that the DEMPED includes the ANC and the ANC includes you. So we'll make sure that we're staying on top of it. And I know you will be staying on top of me, which I appreciate. All right, good. With that said, Benita, thank you so much.
right,
I am going to promote Daniel here. Give me just a moment. There we go. Promote to panelist. Okay, so Daniel, you are now been promoted to panelist to talk about 1617 U Street and Rita Bright. And for those of you, as Daniel is coming on the line here, for those of you who don't know, because I'm learning as I go, DEMPED has a whole team of folks, and they break out the different projects to different folks to manage them so that their portfolio is not overwhelming to one person. Vanita has part of the portfolio. One of those properties obviously is Reeves. Daniel has a different part of the portfolio. He includes 1617 and Rita Bright. So we appreciate that both of them were able to join us tonight. So Daniel, the floor is yours. And I think we said we were going to start with 1617, but I may be wrong.
You did say that. Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel Lyons. I am like Vanita, a development manager with DEMPED. I have various real estate projects across the city that I manage, two of which, as Commissioner Fay said, are the topics tonight, 1617U and Rita Bright. And, I'll take whatever questions you have. I will start by saying the update I have for you is not really any different than the updates I have given to you in the past. This project really got started in the beginning of 2022, over 3 years ago. It was announced at March Madness in 2022, went to a surplus hearing in July of that year. I first met with the ANC at the beginning of 2023. And I think I've had over 15 meetings with 3 different ANCs, 1B, 2B, and 1C. A lot of hours spent talking to you, presenting to you about the project and what could happen there. There were 6 resolutions that came out of all of those meetings, which I shared with you, Commissioner, from the 3 different ANCs. And I think 4 of those came from 1B, and then there was 1 each from the other 2, from 1C and 2B. And concurrent with that process was a zoning process. OP filed an application with the Zoning Commission to rezone the property from MU4 to MU10. And there were actually 2 zoning cases. 23-26 is the main case, and 23-02 was the main case. And that's a map amendment. And then the second case, 23-26, is a kind of ancillary case to the main case, and that's a text amendment. Both of those have been decided. The first case, 23-02, was decided. Proposed action was July last year. Final action was September. And the other case, 23-26, I believe final action was in January. And currently, final orders from the commission, from the zoning commission, are still pending. I would have thought at least the first order would have come out by now. It has not. Back in the fall, I had been given a timeline, an expectation of 4 to 6 months to write and publish the orders. So using that standard, I would have expected the first case to, or the first order to have come out now, but it has not. I checked today. The commission's staff still do not have a timeline for that. So we are waiting on those orders. And to answer the obvious question, the one that I continue to get, I do not have a date for an RFP. You know, what we agreed to in the past, going back to all those meetings I mentioned with the ANCs, in the first resolution that came out, I think it was the first one, and certainly discussed in those meetings leading to that resolution, the ANC and the community asked that DEMPED hold off on issuing an RFP until the zoning had been decided. And we acknowledged that request and agreed to it. And, you know, frankly, the RFP has been on hold for all that time for that reason. So that's the essential update. I guess, let me know if you have questions.
Great. No, thank you, Daniel. And look, I mean, I'll say this for my own part. I know that sometimes it's frustrating to be the person that's asked to come and give an update, and the update is we're still working on it. And I just want to say thank you for coming and presenting to the group, because the thing that I think is most comforting is that people know that they're involved in a conversation. And the conversation is, here's where we're at, right? It may not be as far along as we'd hoped it would be, and some of it is still out of our hands, but I think for folks to hear that this is where we are and this is what we've gone through and this is what we're waiting on is still incredibly important. And so thank you for coming in and sharing that. I guess one question that might be worth talking a little bit about is just kind of looking forward and kind of talking a little bit about the community engagement process that you would envision for the development of an RFP. And I'm not, and I should, I'll talk to Christian and get more scrubbed in around the rationale for holding off on the RFP until the zoning work is finished. But could you maybe share with us a little bit about kind of the thinking about the engagement process that would accompany the formulation of an RFP, so that folks have a sense of how they can get involved, what you would want from us, which would be kind of a combination of the ANC, but also the community, so that we're, you know, helpful and constructive in that process?
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the question, but that goes back to, you know, what I said before about, you know, this process really began 3 years ago, and the meetings with the ANCs began 2 years ago, at least for me. And, you know, Commissioner Handerhan in particular, he was your predecessor, chair
Yep.
of the Economic Development Committee. You know, we talked a lot and met quite a bit. And his goal was the same as your goal, the one that you just expressed, to have engagement. And that was, you know, that was a primary driver of all those 15 meetings, literally over 30 hours of ANC meetings that I spent, which I would venture to say is somewhat unprecedented. I don't think we would normally have that much time spent with the ANCs before an RFP. And, you know, the result of that were the 6 resolutions, and some of those expressly stated what the ANC and the community wanted to see in an RFP. So they have, I think, accomplished the goal that you're now talking about. Now, having said that, that doesn't prevent you from passing another resolution or continuing, you know, we want to continue that discussion. I did share those resolutions with you. I know you and your fellow commissioners were going to review them. And, you know, if you have if you want to engage in further discussion on, whether those should be refined in some way, then that is certainly your prerogative. And I'll continue to listen to that. I will say any RFP that I participate in or that I have written will always direct the respondents to engage the community directly as part of their preparation of a response and to describe what they have done in terms of engagement and to review the documentation that's already been produced, in this case the 6 resolutions I mentioned, to inform their response and to shape their proposal and their design.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, I think it does. I've got three committee members hands up, so I'm going to take them in order, and then Courtney Stockland, I see you, so you'll be the fourth to ask a question. But Frank, I'm going to turn it to you. I'm going to set my timer over here to about 2 minutes, and I'll give you a heads up when that's going off. But Frank, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, for attending tonight. I think this is 31 hours or 32 hours for you on this subject. My question is, it seems like, I don't know if that 30 hours was included all zoning, right? I think it did.
No,
No.
no, that the zoning itself, there were 7 public hearings in the zoning, which by themselves took 30 hours, completely separate from
Right.
the 30 I mentioned before. And there were actually, 20 zoning meetings in total, I think, but most of those are not public hearings. There's only 7 public hearings. Well, I shouldn't say only, that's actually a lot, but yeah, so just to be clear, that's separate. So it amounted to roughly 30 hours in public hearings for the zoning commission. It amounted to over 30 hours in the ANC meetings that I had, but please continue.
Yes, so that was my point. I mean, it was a substantial amount of Commissioner Fay's predecessor and everybody at this table on the committee and lots of the public, 60 hours probably or more altogether. And I'm just wondering, why was it such a mess? Why did we need so much? And what can we do better going forward? I mean, how can we enumerate the pitfalls? Because it was a waste of a lot of resources, I think, in several measures, including 60 hours, 30 plus 30. And I just want to know what we can do better going forward. Is that another conversation, another day? I don't know. And I just like to hear what you'd like to say about that, because it was strong on my 60 hours. I didn't attend all 60, but substantial number. And, it just seemed like there were so many pitfalls and wasted time. So I'll leave it at that with whatever you can offer as a response.
Yeah, and I might offer, although Daniel, you're welcome to answer that. I might offer, Frank, that's probably a worthy conversation for us to have kind of offline, to say what are lessons learned and how do we improve the way that we do this work going forward. But Daniel, if you'd like to provide a response, you're certainly welcome to.
Yeah, well, let's separate first the zoning process from the ANC process. The zoning process is, of course, controlled by the zoning commission. So neither I nor OP nor the ANC certainly can control that. But fundamentally, people they want to feel engaged and they have opinions and they want to have the opportunity to be heard. And I think the ANC commissioners, all 3 ANCs, the zoning commissioners, were trying to be responsive to that. And so separate the zoning commission and the ANCs. And just looking at the ANC part of it, there's 3 different ANCs. So certainly they have different constituencies, and I think they need to be separated also for that reason. If we then focus on, I guess, 1B, that probably was the bulk of it was certainly the bulk of the time with the ANCs. And Again, it's just trying to be responsive and listening to folks and wanting, that want to be heard on the case. There is obviously divided opinion on this project and what the future of the site should be. And that contributes to more extensive discussion. And I know that Commissioner Handahan and the previous commissioners, and I think Commissioner Kumar has been there all along, but wanted to conduct I believe Commissioner Kumar, you conducted a survey, and there were particular steps that added time. I don't know that I have. I don't know that I have any more like guidance for you. It's the ANC's privilege and prerogative to decide how to conduct its business. So I can't steer you that way. All I can say is that everyone is trying to make sure that we understand the different opinions about what can happen here and try to make sure that everyone is heard.
Great.
Thank you.
Bottom line.
Okay, we're going to go to Ian, then Krishna, and then we've got two hands in the audience that we're going to go to next.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Daniel, for taking the time to talk to us today. I have to say that I was part of this process with the zoning discussions, and
Yes.
my recollection is a little different. I mean, I thought it was, and I thought everybody agreed when it was over that it was a somewhat flawed is a strong word, but that the process could have been better, right? That there was a lack of engagement, that there were signs that were set up that nobody saw, there were letters sent out that didn't reach the right people, that there was an equity tool that wasn't applied, that there was there was information which turned out to be wrong. So my point is this: the issues around zoning and the debate around the site it was somewhat of a chaotic process, as Frank mentioned. The other thing that I recollect in great detail, which was said hundreds of times, probably over those 30 hours or whatever, was we cannot talk about the project. For God's sake, stop talking about the project. It's just a zoning discussion. We have lots of time to talk about the project. So my impression was that, or is that, the community was not really heard about on the project. They were heard about the zoning because the chairman policed that quite strenuously. So I'm surprised if maybe I'm misunderstanding you, but I'm surprised if your approach is that we don't need a structured community engagement around the RFP prior and as input to the RFP, because this process has happened before, so I'm hoping that wasn't the message, but I suppose that's my question is, so that's question number one. And question number two is, I see that you have a rather excellent tool called something like our process, our RFP process, a dedicated sort of structured tool. Is that correct? So I'm wondering, are you planning to use that, or what's the plan? Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Hawksworth, thank you for your questions. I certainly remember you giving testimony in the zoning process. I think you may have missed some of the ANC meetings, but I would encourage you to look at the resolutions that your own ANC passed, and you will see that they deal directly with what the community would like to see on the future of the site, which is the project, separate from the zoning. The zoning process was led by OP, not, the application wasn't filed by DEMPET, it was filed by OP, but the signs you mentioned, I don't recall anyone ever flagging that. There were, I think, I'd have to look, like 9 signs posted all around the property, substantially more than was required, or substantially longer than was required. And there were hundreds of people participating in the process. So I don't know if you're suggesting that people weren't aware of it and not able to participate.
Daniel, hi, sorry to just jump in really quick. I think Ian was referring to one very specific thing that came up, and this was not anything to do with DemPed, but with the, I think, the Office of Zoning, where in sending out the required notice by mail,
Okay.
one of the 2 lots was omitted. So there was only a radius of addresses done around the address of 1617U, but it did not account for the radius around the V Street lot, which is what would have like
Yeah.
encompassed several of the properties
Okay.
should have gotten notice. So then it was postponed and renoticed.
Yeah.
So there
Thank
was
you,
that
David.
very specific incident.
Yeah, thank you, David. You are correct. That did happen going back June. I think it was when the initial hearing had been scheduled. As David said, the zoning commission, I think, had an error in their mailing. So yeah, Commissioner Hawksworth and David, you are correct about that. And the hearing was renoticed and postponed to a later date.
I think I want to, I want to honor Ian's concerns, right? I mean, because Ian, you're raising some process concerns. I want to equally honor Daniel's, and David's clarifications. I think that's important. I don't think that we're going to go back and change at this point the zoning conversation or the zoning outcome. And I think that the real question is really focused on given where we are today, where do we go from here? And I think maybe that's focused on the RFP itself. And so maybe Daniel, there's 2 questions that I heard in Ian's comments. The first one was, is there a plan to have discussion on programming beyond the resolutions that were submitted previously? And we're certainly happy to go back and kind of have a discussion about anything that might have changed and to submit additional, resolutions that provide additional clarity. And or our RFP process that is delineated on the DemPed site. I think that the focus really is around the moving forward and getting the community voice to you in a productive way. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Fay. I appreciate that question. Our RFP, which Commissioner Hawksworth was referring to, is a type of RFP that was instituted by Mayor Bowser some years ago. It's been used a number of times. I would say in general, DemPed has been moving away from that and trying to incorporate that engagement in direct meetings, the same type of meetings that I was talking about earlier. I know I heard Ms. Beskinich on the line earlier. She had sent me an email asking about that, and I think another 1 or 2 people have also. And I've shared that interest and relayed that interest. Ultimately, that will be a decision of the deputy mayor and mayor when that time comes. But it's what I said. The general idea is we are trying to meet with the ANC and the community directly in the types of meetings that we have been having over the past couple of years, and gaining your feedback that way and encouraging the ANCs to issue resolutions if they are appropriate. And in fact, the 3 ANCs did that in this case. You're certainly welcome again to review that and to ask questions of me as you go through that process, and to refine that if you think it's warranted.
Okay, great. We'll make sure we do that, and we'll use this as our forum to do that. Krishna, and then there are now, I think, 4 hands up in the audience, so I want to get to them as well.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Daniel, 2 questions and sort of 1 comment for you. Questions. Number 1, this delay from the zoning on the zoning side, in your experience, what is the basis of this delay? I mean, I'm trying to understand if this is just an administrative delay on their part or whether there's any that they're rethinking their decision. Question 2 is when we had sort of talked generally, I know that the preference for DempEd for a lot of these projects was to do ground leases and not fee simple sales. I just wanted to see if that thinking has changed at all, really, since the last time we spoke about this, which was probably about a year and a half ago. And the third thing, just a comment on the our RFP, and I understand that, as you said, DempEd is moving away from it. The one example that I know about that used the RFP was the Chevy Chase Civic Center, and frankly, what I hear from the community is that has not been a success in the sense it's not been a success because that project has been tremendously delayed. And I'm just curious from your perspective, what would be the differences in our RFP process versus what you're doing now?
I also have trouble saying that word.
Yeah.
It's
I probably that's one reason why you don't want to use it. It's a bad word, come up with a new word for it. But anyways, I'm just curious if you could just share sort of any generalized insights. I'm not, again, trying to hold you to something here. I'm just trying to pick your brain on saying, how did the RFP work and how it's different than what we're doing now?
Okay, well, let's start one by one. The first question regarding the zoning commission, I don't know is the answer. I will say there's always a backlog, or has been for a while, in writing and publishing the orders, so that is expected. The exact timing, the flow of orders, if you will vary a bit, and maybe it's just gotten a little bit longer at this point in time. But I will also say that this particular case is complicated, and I would expect it to be a little more time consuming to write that order. The second question about ground leases versus fee simple, yes, you are correct in what you relayed from memory, that in general, we favor ground leases over a fee simple because by retaining a ground lease, we retain ownership and thereby we retain control. I think the only time we would really entertain a fee simple disposition is if the ANC and community specifically asked for it. Otherwise, we generally want to retain that control.
Well, I know, like in the Reeve Center, there was some discussion of having to do a fee simple because there was talk about some of the units being condos that would be sold, and that so I mean that would be one reason why you would move towards a fee simple. But I'm just trying to understand if there's been any change of thought of that on DempEd side.
Right. I don't. Not from my perspective. We have had a change in leadership since we began this process, but I still don't think that perspective has changed. But you just said it. The scenario where that would be most likely is home ownership, and to have home ownership, the homes have to be sold fee simple, and that's the only way to do it. But again, that would be driven, at least in my mind, it would be driven by the community specifically asking for that.
Yeah, or we have a River Place situation like in Roslyn where the condos are under a ground lease that will expire in 15 years, and it's a nightmare for the owners there.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the RFP process, and then I want to turn to the community. And I think the question you raised, Krishna, was the our RFP versus incorporating the our RFP principles into the engagement process?
Yeah, first I'll say, I think Commissioner Fay, you had mentioned a moment ago, or whatever it was, 10 minutes ago, something about programming, or one of the commissioners mentioned programming. And, you know, what's unique and special about 1617U is it has 3 district facilities there, 3 different agencies, a police station, a fire station, a fuel station, that's MPD, FEMS, DPW. And I did meet and talk with all of those agencies to figure out the program that they need, like what services, what kinds of spaces, what kinds of functions and features, going back to the beginning of this project for me 2 years ago. And, you know, those agencies are in essence a kind of customer, if you will. And, you know, it's a primary fundamental part of any RFP on this site would be, as I'm sure everyone has heard me say before, to provide those agencies with new facilities, state-of-the-art facilities. So those discussions have already taken place. I'm sure I would reconnect with them before any RFP went out to, you know, make sure that information is current. And you mentioned, or Commissioner Kumar, I think, mentioned Chevy Chase, and that is true, and that project is ongoing now. You know, one difference between that site and that project and this one at U Street is how the site is used and the nature of the facilities there. Chevy Chase has district-owned facilities also, agency facilities. It's a library, it's a community center. Those are very much public serving, and the public goes there to take out books, to study, to take exams. They go there to play basketball or pickleball or whatever it might be. U Street also has district facilities, but they're very different. So the programs are driven, in the case of Chevy Chase, the program would be driven more by the public because those facilities are serving them directly. Whereas at U Street, the facilities are serving the agencies. You know, an exception would be the community room that's in the police station at U Street. And I would expect that to be in any new facility. But, you know, the 2 projects, the 2 properties are very different in that respect.
Let's do this. We've got about 5 hands up in the audience. I'm just going to read your names so that you know that I'm tracking you. Courtney Stockland, you're going to be first. Amanda Law, and I mispronounced it, will be next. Gregory Adams, Arlene, and then Janet. So Courtney, you're going to be up first, and then we'll move through the list one by one.
Thanks so much. Thanks to Mr. Lyons for his continued candor. Contradictory to his remarks tonight, he was the one who confirmed for us previously that the emergency and safety service may very well not be returning to the site after they are wiped out by a private developer for private profit. And now he is thankfully alerting us to alerting the community that we will not be involved in the explicit development of the RFP process because we've already
didn't say that.
Okay, because we've already surpassed the number of hours a civil servant would like to spend on any project.
Yeah,
with respect, I did not say that.
Yeah, Courtney, let's do this.
I'm going to finish my remarks if you don't mind, and I think the overall context.
Hold on, Courtney. You may and you should finish your remarks, but I also want to acknowledge that Mr. Lyons is here, and we appreciate his presence. And so I don't want there to be an attack. I appreciate some of the things that you're saying, which is clarifying, but if you can just change the tone, that would be helpful.
So let's remember that it was the administration, OP, as Mr. Lyons very helpfully, actually, it's not DEMPED that did this, chose to take on zoning first, a backwards approach, which of course took more time than the normal approach because it was indeed a backwards process done in the theoretical. I think we all agree it was an absolute mess And again, that was OP's choice to tackle it that way. They had their strategic, I guess, path forward that may have worked out for them in the end, but was pretty miserable for all of us to live through in the meantime. I also want us to never forget that this is a huge piece of publicly owned property that currently houses vital city services, including police. We continue to be in the middle of an ongoing and unfettered era of crime in the city, and taking away a core remediation location is unwise. They do actually service directly, as anybody in the neighborhood knows. Especially handing it over to a private developer with guidance to please kindly, if they feel like it, talk to neighbors. It just remains wildly inappropriate from my perspective. This continues to be an exercise a little bit in gaslighting, but I feel like our community is a bit wiser given the last couple of years and experience with this process. It sort of sounds like the RFP is already written and then it's just being held artificially to heed the public's request. Maybe Mr. Lyons can answer if it is already written or very far along in the drafting process. The spirit behind that request of the public to hold it until the zoning language dropped was obviously so that we could work collaboratively together after that language was zoned. We were promised that time and time again. This is another example of a bait and switch in the process. And I'll certainly be alerting our neighbors that things may taken a left turn in terms of us having direct input into the RFP. Maybe Mr. Lyons can correct that. And what I think would be really great is if DemPed could informally release the RFP to the ANC and our community for our review and commentary at this point. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Courtney. And look, Courtney, I stopped you for a minute around tone, but the only way that all these processes work is that people come and have a voice and raise their concerns. I will, maybe tick through your points very quickly just to make sure that I've captured them. I had also heard whether the police and fire was going to stay. So I think that's an important question, whether we answer it here or we answer that in the coming month. But the police and fire station, whether it's going to stay, is critically important. The big discussion that we're having tonight is the community's involvement in that RFP development process. And so we're asking questions of Mr. Lyons and trying to ascertain kind of what role we're going to have as we go forward. And my intent is for the ANC and the community to be able to work with DemPed to finalize an RFP before an RFP is released, and so that the community feels like they have the opportunity to participate in that dialogue. I have been involved in a handful of bigger kind of projects like this, not this one, but in my part of the commission. And we ended up starting with zoning as well for a variety of reasons, where if the zoning didn't get right, then you couldn't really figure out what was going to go in there. And it led us to the same kind of like catch-22, where it's really hard to figure out programming without knowing zoning. It's really hard to commit to zoning without being able to talk about programming. And so my understanding is that a lot of time has been put into the zoning conversation, and that less time maybe has been put into programming. And that's the real kind of hunger of the community, is to be able to provide input on the programming aspect, and to make sure that there's some transparency and some clarity about what is being solicited to go onto this parcel that so many folks have been involved in and have residences and homes right around. But those were my takeaways. Courtney, is there anything that I didn't get right
I think,
or missed?
Commissioner Fay, please understand that there's a major trust issue at this point between the public and DemPed and OP and the administration, right? Because of multiple different issues throughout the last few years. So there is no way that the community is going to believe that the police and fire and refueling will return unless we see that with our own eyes in a legally binding document that has no loopholes for the private developer. Do you know what I'm saying? There's no trusting anymore, because it seems like everything that we're promised in terms of not feeling like we're participating, but actually being able to affect outcomes in a collaborative way, is sort of like cosplayed. I'm not sure how else to say that.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm familiar, although I was not directly involved. I'm familiar with I think the trust challenges that emerged through this. All right, we're going to make sure that we keep this conversation going tonight, but also into the future. So Courtney, thank you. Amanda, I'm going to put you in next. Oops. Sorry, Amanda. I think I put you up there and then there you go.
That's okay. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I have three questions. I'm hoping to make it relatively straightforward. The first, actually, I want to just uplift, I think, what I heard Courtney say at the very end, which was just a question about how far along the RFP kind of is. Sorry, I wrote this in the Q&A earlier. Once the zoning order is issued, how quickly does DEMPET expect to move on the RFP? Kind of related to that. So, Danielle, thank you for being here and taking the time. I know we've met before. From my
Hey.
understanding, the RFP issued has to follow DC Code 1081, you said before, which states that the mayor needs to hold a public hearing specific to the need for disposition of the site as public land. So if DEMPET does not open an RFP process for the site, will you still be holding this hearing prior to issuing the RFP? Or has the mayor already decided that this site is no longer required for public purposes? And then finally, my last question is, will the proposed method of disposition be included in the RFP that's issued? And has DEMPET already prepared an analysis of each disposition method as listed in 1081, and will this be publicly available?
Great, thanks. Thank you,
So,
Amanda. Very, very clear. Danielle, are those any of those questions things you can answer?
yeah, nice to hear from you, Amanda. We spoke, I guess it was a month or so ago, and Amanda's another one of the neighbors that had asked about the RFP process. And the hearing, yes, you are correct in remembering that the process for surplus and disposition follows DC Code 10801, and that code includes a requirement for two hearings, one of which is called the surplus hearing. And I think that is what you are referring to, Amanda. That actually already, I mentioned it earlier, that actually took place in 2022, July of 2022. And on the project website, there is a blurb about that hearing, and there's also a recording of that event, if you care to review that. So that's actually happened already. But in terms of making a decision on surplus and disposition, I think we talked a little bit about this when we spoke in the past. My colleague Benita touched on this earlier, but when the process goes through surplus and disposition, it will, after DEMPET conducts its hearings, there's the surplus hearing I mentioned before, after that's before the RFP, and then after the RFP, there is what's called a disposition hearing, and any respondents to the RFP would present directly to the community at that hearing. And subsequent to that, there would be a selection, at least in theory. And if there is a selection, then that recommendation and that a legislative package would go to the council, and the council would conduct its own hearings, also called a surplus hearing and a disposition hearing. And it's at that time that the council and the mayor decide whether this happens. So it needs the mayor and the council's blessing after we go through our process. I think that answered a couple questions.
Yeah.
Was
let me ask, kind of re-ask one of Amanda's questions, which is the RFP written, or is it something that you're still working on? Because I think there may be a desire to be able to provide some updated input beyond the six resolutions that you've already received. So is it something that is still in process and still fluid, where you would be able to receive some additional input to consider?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, I think I certainly tried to communicate that earlier when I, acknowledged the 6 resolutions that have already been produced, and I told you it's your prerogative to review and refine those and come back to DEMPED with additional information or another resolution. That's I leave that in your court. I mentioned before, yes, I worked with the agencies on what their needs are for new facilities. I would have to go back to them, and the RFP certainly is not in final form at all, and would not be until the day it's issued.
Okay, good. And I did hear that in your previous comments, but I also sometimes when we talk about the trust pieces, sometimes it's easier just to ask the direct question, and you gave a very direct answer, so we appreciate that. Great, Amanda, thank you for your question. Greg Adams, you are next. I'm gonna click the button, and you should be able to speak once you unmute.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Lyons, and thank you for being here. I was the party representative of Black neighbors of 1617 U Street during those 30 hours of hearings before the Zoning Commission. My questions is, how does DEMPED plan to avoid the mistakes made by the Office of Planning in that they did no community outreach? They ignored the city's racial equity tool. They ignored the racial equity component of the city's comp plan. And they referred to the city's failed IZ program when assuring it would be used in future planning. Also, is DEMPED willing to take a serious look at providing social housing on this publicly owned site when dealing with the RFP? Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Adams. Certainly, I definitely remember you from past discussions and testimony at the Zoning Commission. Thank you for your earnest participation and interest, and for your questions. Yeah, I've had discussions with a couple of people about social housing. Amanda, who you just heard from, she that was very much on her mind when we had a discussion recently. And I'll repeat what I said to her, and I think maybe in some past meetings, but we follow DC Code 10801 for our process. It has certain requirements, including, as I mentioned, certain public hearings that need to be done and notices, timelines for those hearings and for other elements of the process. And it also includes a requirement, if there's a housing component, that must be a minimum of 30% of that in affordable housing, under 30% AMI and 50% AMI. If someone wants to submit a proposal that conforms to the social housing model and meets the minimums or standards of 10801, then that's certainly something that can be submitted and reviewed and evaluated, and compete with anything else that's submitted. So yes, that's possible. I don't know that I can speak to exactly what OP did do or did not do. That was a separate process. But I continue to value your input. You are welcome to engage with me, and we'll continue to have meetings like this. Thank the commissioners for arranging this one and being able to entertain the questions, and I'll try to continue to do that.
And Greg, definitely appreciate your kind of offering up your kind of observed missteps on the OP front, and kind of asking how we can avoid those as we go into the next phase. So thank you for that. Arlene, you are next. Frank, I'm gonna come back to you as soon as we get done with the 2 hands that are raised in the audience. I've got Arlene and Janet, and then Frank, I'll come back to you.
Okay, I just have a couple of comments. I want to encourage ANC1B to revisit the resolutions that they passed, because a lot of information has been brought to light that, the community engagement occurred during the zoning hearings. But I want to remind you that I'm sorry, am I still on?
Yeah. You're here, Arlene. We can hear you.
Sorry. I want to remind everyone that the resolutions were passed before the zoning hearings took place. And since a lot of information came out during the zoning hearings and a lot of public engagement was expressed, I think it's incumbent on us to revisit those resolutions and try to incorporate more of what we learned during those zoning hearings. That was my one comment.
Yep.
And my second comment was, I just wanted to let everyone know that quite a few members of the community, and including representation from ANC1B, took a tour of Montgomery County's social housing project, the Laureate. It's at the end of the Red Line, Shady Grove Red Line station. And I think all of us were very, very impressed with that project, how it's being run, how successful it's been. It remains publicly owned property. It has a good mixture of housing incomes, and it's all interspersed. So there's no, one building for lower income and another side of the building for market rate. It's all interspersed. And I think that was a successful tour. And I want to alert everyone that these kinds of alternatives do exist, and they work. And the property would remain under district control. And we would have, I think, more opportunity to serve the community by using something like social housing. So those two comments, that we really need to revisit those resolutions and to incorporate all that we learned during those zoning hearings. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Arlene. And I think it is important, right? If we look at the resolutions, which I know a number of folks have, I'll make sure that I get them back out to the whole of the committee, so that you've got them. If there are other members of the community that also want to look at what the resolutions say, you should feel free to email me. I don't, unfortunately, have the benefit of having the email addresses of the folks who show up here. But you can always email me. My email address is 1b01@anc.dc.gov. I'll try to put that in the chat. But you can email me and say, hey, I'd like to get a copy of the resolutions and see what DemPed has. More than happy to share that information. And if you look at it and say, hey, there's something missing that we learned, then let me know that as well. We're not going to decide on any new criteria outside of a public meeting. So anything that we would discuss would be discussed and debated and deliberated in a public setting, and then finalized and formalized in the committee and then taken to the ANC. But certainly open to that idea. And Daniel, appreciate your team's openness as well. Janet, Greg, I think your hand is still up. Let me know if that's still the case. Otherwise, you can drop it. Janet, I'm going to put you up here.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is the first time I've been involved in this kind of procedure. So I have a couple of questions which weren't really answered. It's not the case that let me not use a double negative. DemPed does not wait until the zoning commission has issued its ruling to begin working on the RFP. Is that correct? In other words, you've already started working on it before the zoning commission has issued its ruling?
Yeah, I said that before. Yes.
Okay.
It was, this process started, the RFP, as I mentioned before, was announced at March Madness 2022. I personally wasn't involved at that time. I took over the project late 2022, I think, or beginning of 2023. But yes, I met with the agencies and worked with them on what they will need in new facilities and worked on the programs for that.
So the RFP was started being developed in 2022 then?
That is when I worked on it, yeah.
Okay, so it's already been worked on for 2 or 3 years.
It was worked on at that time, and as I mentioned, the ANC requested by resolution that an RFP not be issued until the zoning was settled. So as I
Right, I'm just
mentioned,
trying to
it's been on
distinguish.
hold.
Okay, yeah, that was what I was not sure about it. So I'm just trying to distinguish between the issuance of the RFP and when DEMPED started working on it. So you didn't, so DEMPED, and I'm sorry, because it's just, I'm not familiar with this procedure. So DEMPED is not required or does not typically wait until the zoning commission has issued a ruling.
There could be cases, other projects, where an RFP goes out before a final decision,
Oh,
if there is a zoning case involved. That has happened on other projects, as I mentioned. In this case,
Yeah,
ANC
Daniel,
made a specific request.
Daniel, it's Christian. Let me just jump in here for a second and give a very specific example of that for Janet, which is the Grimkey site, which, if you remember the Grimkey site, which is over on Vermont Avenue, it was a former school that was inhabited by DC Femmes as their headquarters for a while. It went through the RFP process. After the RFP was awarded, it was discovered that zoning changes were needed, and we had the developer had to go through a map amendment in that project in order to move it forward. And that's it's I think, I don't want to speak for Daniel here, but one of the goals is to do that stuff before they issue the RFP, because it's a little clearer on who's responsible for what at that point.
yeah. Okay. So, and then I guess my other question, which you may not be able, may be unreasonable, but do you have any like estimate of how long it will take to issue the RFP once the zoning commission issues its ruling?
Certainly a fair question. I will say what I've said before. It's ultimately at the discretion of the deputy mayor and mayor. I can't predict that.
Okay, that's
there are a
I
lot there are a lot of variables that go into the decision, and this got started in 2022. The DEMPED leadership has changed since then. The market has changed. The budgets have changed. There's a lot of variables that are different now than they were 3 years ago. But it's ultimately not my decision. It's the deputy mayor and mayor's decision.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
And David Menny, I think you were going to, from the council member's office, also had a couple of points to clarify.
Hey, thanks, Commissioner. Yeah, and Daniel, I also don't want to feel like I'm speaking for you, so apologies. But I do want to just make sure we avoid miscommunication here, or somebody walking away with the wrong impression. And Janet, thank you actually for the direct question on this. I think it's helpful. So I think, Daniel, what I'm hearing is that, like, I know there's a lot that goes into RFPs, even for less complex projects than this. And I think what you're saying when you were engaging with the agencies in working on this, that's not, I don't want people to have the impression that this is something that's like happening behind the scenes and basically things have been decided without community input. But rather, you need to hear from FEMS, from MPD about what, the parameters are, or what their requirements are for their new facilities. And it's very
Yes.
much an internal conversation between agencies to replace those facilities. It is not behind the scenes decision making about what the project's going to look like, what other programming is being added, things that I think, at least my understanding is, you plan to continue to do. And I think it would be fair to say that, quote unquote, working on the RFP includes your presence here at meetings like this.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, David. Thank you for that input. And yeah, so for example, FEMS wants to have a ladder truck and a pumper truck and 2 hazmat vehicles, and those vehicles are 80 feet long, 60 feet long, 40 feet long, and there's staffing 24/7 and 2 shifts, and we need this many lockers, and all, it's that kind of fundamental specifications, if you will, that ensure that the agencies get the facilities they need to be able to serve the public in the best way.
Thanks. And actually, Daniel, just while we're on this subject with the agency specifications, I may be completely misremembering this, so apologies, but is it still the case that MPD has requested that any replacement facility for the third district not have housing above it? Or did I totally misremember that?
Fair question. I mean, that's one of the items I would have to go back to the police about. The leadership there has also changed. There's a new commander at the third district as of December. And, but I think in general, that's to be determined, but I think in general, they are amenable to a municipal facility that could be, police and fire contiguous to each other. Beyond that, I can't, we're not far along enough we're not ready to issue the RFP. We don't have that specified at this time.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, Daniel, I think part of what, if I was to try to find a balance here and a productive path forward, I think part of what I'm hearing from you and David, many, thank you for kind of the clarifying questions you asked. The RFP is definitely in process because this is a very complicated RFP, right? You've got a lot of different needs that you're trying to balance. And so you're having to do a lot of due diligence. The balancing is that with all that complication, the community wants to make sure that its voice is being heard with updated information, and that to the extent that it makes sense and that it's responsive, that gets incorporated into the RFP. And so I don't think it's a bad thing that RFP is in process. And you have said a couple of times tonight that you would definitely invite feedback from the community. And I think part of what we're all kind of thinking through right now is just what's the nature of that feedback and what is a productive way to make sure that feedback is captured and shared. And I don't think that we're trying to do another 30 hours. I think we can do more efficient. But I think we want to make sure that we've got the opportunity to do that. And you have said yes. So again, to folks here who have showed up tonight and have already invested themselves and their time, the ANC and this committee is committed to making sure that we're capturing community feedback, working with DemPed to communicate and transmit that. How we do that, I think we've got some kind of discussions about process and approach, but we want to do that and we want your input. And again, email me, email Krishna. You probably have his email address more than mine. But let's make sure we get your kind of thoughts and suggestions, and then we'll start working to have a public forum to do that, which could be the next Economic Development Committee meeting. And Janet, thank you for your very pointed, I think, and thoughtful questions. Frank, I'll turn it to you. Last question on this topic, and then we're going to take just a couple minutes on Rita Bright, and then we're going to wrap up, with any kind of other items and then our adjournment.
Yeah, Daniel, can you clarify what you meant, please, on social housing and how your office would accept, I think, an RFP response that was adequately balanced financially to meet the needs of the city and the needs of this project as defined by DemPed? I'm going to ask you that, but I wanted to start out by saying, how would your office handle a request from the ANC if there was such a request, resolution asking for social housing, as an additional component in this RFP? And how, lastly and relatedly, would your office, would DemPed respond, and do they regularly respond to ANCs in writing? Why or why not a component of a resolution was accepted? Is that part of your understanding of your response to an ANC required under the ANC Act. I'm just trying to understand this little piece of business that takes place often that isn't questioned enough and or understood enough by the public and the people that participated in this course in this conversation.
Well, I would say first, when an RFP goes out, anyone could submit a response, whether it is compliant with the requirements of the RFP and compliant with DC law, including 10801 is another story. It would have to be evaluated and judged that way. And I think you can deliberate amongst yourselves as to whether there's anything you want to add in a resolution regarding the future of this site, and we will certainly take that into consideration. I think the law you were referring to is that district agencies, the executive branch, gives, quote, what's known as great weight to the ANC, affected ANCs, which would include 1B, since the property is located in 1B. And that doesn't mean that the district strictly incorporates a particular ask or item, but we would certainly consider it. And the one example was, as I mentioned before, the RFP was put on hold because the ANC requested that. Does that answer your question? What was the?
And David, do you have other kind of perspectives that you want to add to that or share?
Yeah, I mean, I was interested in speaking a little bit to the social housing part of Frank's question, but I didn't want to interrupt an exchange if there was one there.
So thank you for further elucidating the great weight. But the great weight, and again, I'm a past commissioner. I'm no longer a commissioner, but serve on this committee. So have studied the great weight a little bit. But great weight is, I believe, understood and interpreted as a response in writing afforded by a resolution approved by an ANC. So that's my question, and I don't know if you think you've answered that, or maybe you have, and I just didn't hear it. So I understand you accept what you like from resolutions, but you do not find an onus or responsibility to respond to other components of a resolution as to why they weren't accepted. Am I correct?
There is not, if I understand the question correctly, there's not a requirement that there be a specific written response, but we would, we certainly try to be responsive. Ultimately, it's up to the deputy mayor if you submit a resolution, what the response is.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Daniel, I think maybe part of what Frank's got in his mind, but Frank, I want to be careful, is that like when we pass a resolution to DDOT to study a change in a traffic pattern, they study it and then they write us actually a very detailed note back. And sometimes that very detailed note says, we're not going to make this change for the following reasons. So I think that's probably the framework of, hey, we've asked for these consideration of these 6 things, and DDOT writes back and says, X, Y, and Z to each of those 6 things. I think what would be good is for us, as we kind of take this forward, is to say, what's the best way for us to communicate new information to you? What kind of response, are you able to provide back to us in terms of saying, yeah, we can do this. No, we can't do this. And you may say, look, we can't provide that level of granularity, but I think it's start of a good kind of ask and a good conversation. Dave, I know you wanted to clarify a couple of things, and then I want to move on to Rita Bright. I see Janet's hand is up one more time. So David, why don't you clarify? Janet, I'll give you one more pass at this, and then we'll move to Rita Bright quickly, and then wrap for the night.
Sure, thanks. And yeah, I don't want to make this evening a full breaking down of the Great Weight Law, but there's some nuance to what's required of agencies, and it has to be sort of comment on official action. But mostly, I just wanted to expand on Frank's question on social housing and also what Arlene mentioned. Um, and largely, I just wanted to bring this up at this meeting to hopefully like help with the continued integrity of these conversations, especially as we move closer to the RFP process and the ANC picks up engagement on the project itself. Is that I would caution against um, calling a concept social housing as something completely apart and I guess like a difference in kind from what the district often does. Councilmember Nadeau was one of the primary co-introducers on both versions of the social housing legislation. Um, and you know, I'll say that I found the agency's testimony to be a little too cavalier on this point, but what they did say, testimony on that bill, is true in that a lot of what the Housing Opportunities Commission does in Montgomery County is sort of a recombination of a lot of what the district does do. I think importantly, to point out the affordability requirements for district-owned properties under Section 1001 are already deeper in affordability levels than what HOC projects do in Montgomery County. I don't want that to be lost. They also do 30% affordability, but it's at much less affordable levels. You know, the council member has been very strongly supportive and advocating for making sure that property is ground leased and retained by the district, especially on this site, since it will be retaining public amenities. You know, it makes a lot of sense. So when you put both of those things together, you know, we've looked pretty extensively into what HOC is doing in the county, and what ends up being the differentiating factor is kind of how it's financed, as opposed to what it's doing. So I just wanted to add a little bit more color to that. Arlene, I think it's really great that you all went up and toured that building. Would love to myself, actually. So happy to talk about that. But I did want to just make sure that that was part of this conversation before we got too far down that road, if that made sense. Happy to answer questions if there's anything on what I said.
Yeah. No, David, I think that's helpful. And it looks like Arlene does have a question on the social housing piece. Janet, you had your hand up first, and then we'll go to Arlene.
Matt, can we just cut off questions after this, though?
Yeah, we're gonna have to. Janet, go ahead. Can you?
I just forgot to take my hand down.
Great. That's fantastic. Arlene's
Thank
got one
you.
question on social housing. Let's promote her, and then we're gonna go to Rita Bright, and then we're gonna close for the night.
I feel I have to say that the DC auditor's report from November had a very negative report about inclusionary zoning. And a lot of what was pitched to the neighbors as, oh, we're going to get all this affordable housing because of inclusionary zoning doesn't add up anymore. The inclusionary zoning has not provided the affordable housing we needed. So I wanted to respond to David. I appreciate your comments about the Montgomery County project. DC doesn't have to do it exactly the same way, but relying on inclusionary zoning has not worked, and we need a different approach.
Thanks, Arlene. Daniel, jump in if I'm wrong, and actually,
Sure.
I should lose to you. But
Yeah.
inclusionary zoning is referring to something I think completely different than the affordable housing that would be produced here. IZ is what's required of private development without any subsidy. That's the like 8 to 10% affordability set aside. The affordable units that would be built here are not IZ units. And I've definitely read through that auditor's report. I agree, there's some concerning stuff in there. A lot of that is with the lease up process and how those units actually get filled. So actually, sort of as with my earlier comment, I want to make sure that we're distinguishing between concepts here.
Yeah, well, during the zoning hearings, IZ was brought up continuously. So I don't know why you're saying it doesn't apply here, but I mean, that's how it was sold to us, that that's the way to get affordable housing. I just want to make sure that that we know that there are other alternatives, and we need to explore those a little bit more.
And David, maybe what we can do is take this one offline.
Yeah.
I'd like to learn a little bit more about the difference between the IZ and the affordable housing that's contemplated here. And I
Yeah.
know that's something that many people are paying attention to. So maybe we just schedule a quick call, and if others want to participate in that, it's going to be a learning call.
Yeah, that's
Sure.
right.
Early, and I think I actually owe you an email about IZ, so
Great.
can definitely follow up.
I know you're trying to move things along, but I'll just say I concur with what David said about the difference between IZ and the affordable housing that's required under 10801. I certainly understand Ms. Feskinich's comment. During the zoning process, the IZ was talked about, and OP, I believe, they requested what's called IZ plus. But they also did make the point that in a DEMPED disposition, the affordable housing requirements would actually be greater than the baseline IZ requirements. And IZ can be as little as, I don't know if I should use the word little, but as 8% affordable housing up to, I think, 20% with IZ plus. But in DEMPED, under 10801, the minimum is, as I said earlier, 30%.
Okay.
It's a complete, as David mentioned, it's a different process, a different regime or structure and law.
This is Kirsten. Let me just jump in for a second. And actually the irony here is that law was passed, I believe, after the 965 Florida disposition, because of the controversy there in terms of increasing the requirements on the sale of public land, which is, we know 965 Florida is better, is where the Whole Foods is Florida and the Wren building. And that has been a very successful example of bringing a large amount of affordable housing into that area. I tangled extensively with the councilwoman on that when it happened, but the ANC at the time worked very well to get a better outcome. So it's just ironic that we're rehashing this from now, I think 12 years ago.
Okay. All right, I think this is definitely a conversation that we're going to have to continue. We'll do it in a separate vein. Arlene, thank you for keeping this front and center in the conversation. David, thank you for your and Daniel for your clarifications. Daniel, can you take us through a quick update on Rita Bright? Then we're going to move to any other business, and then we're going to adjourn.
Yeah, sure. So we talked a little bit about this, when was it, a month or two ago?
Yep.
And in some ways similar to 1617U, Rita Bright is stuck in a zoning process. However, it's the BZA, not the zoning commission, that is involved here. The property at 2500 14th Street is just under an acre. A few years back, it's a DPR, it was entirely a DPR facility. That's the Rita Bright Recreation Center. And a few years back, somebody mentioned, I think it was Commissioner Kumar, short-term family housing project for Ward 1. It's a building called the Terrell, was built on what used to be the parking lot for the DPR Recreation Center. So in essence now, the northern half of the property is DHS, which is that short-term family housing project, and the southern half is DPR. And the goal for a DEMPED project would be to, our focus and interest would only be on the southern half, the DPR facility, which is, according to DPR itself, in dire repair or need for repair. And to have a project, we would need to subdivide the land and separate those uses so that the northern half remains in district ownership and can continue to be operated by DHS and serve its constituency. And then the DEMPED project could rebuild the DPR facility and at the same time add housing. We cannot proceed with that at this time because there's an open BZA case related to the construction of the short-term family housing project. It goes back to 2020, and the BZA did hold a hearing earlier this year. And well, actually, they held a hearing back in 2020, and they denied an appeal by a condominium association that is next door. They heard the case again earlier this year and affirmed that denial of the appeal and issued a draft order. And it's just gotten a bit complicated. DGS and DOB filed motions for reconsideration to amend the order. Those were denied. And right now, where it sits is the BZA needs to issue a new order. And that could take a few months.
Okay.
And then once that happens, there would be a 30-day appeal period. If there are no exceptions and no appeal filed, at that time, I would imagine filing for a subdivision application, and that would take roughly 30 days to get approved. Then we would get a mayor's order establishing the separate jurisdictions, as I mentioned, northern half versus southern half. And then we could potentially go into the surplus and disposition process, beginning with a surplus hearing.
Okay. It sounds like something we should revisit in a couple of months, see where we're at. But thank you for the detailed update there. And I know it's been kind of a slog. Are there any questions on this one? Laura Richards, give me a second here. There you go. Laura, you should be able to talk.
Unmuted, okay. Yes, my question went to the inclusionary zoning issue, and I thought I heard one of you say that this 1617 wasn't going to include inclusionary zoning, it was going to include another kind of affordable housing, and I think I must have misheard that, so if you could clarify.
Sure. So any DEMPED project under the surplus and disposition law follows DC Code 10801. That actually is the surplus and disposition law, and that requires that if there's a housing component to the project, that 30% of that housing be reserved for affordable housing at a minimum. So a minimum 30% would need to be affordable, meaning under 30% MFI or AMI, it's area median income. Or
actually, I think the statute has certain tranches at 30%, and then another tranche of that at 60%, and maybe up to 80%. It's not
30%. Yeah, if
yes.
it's rental, if it's apartments, then it's 30% and 50%.
Mm-hmm.
So of the total housing, it would have to be 30% affordable minimum. It could be 100%.
Right.
Now,
yes.
but out of that 30%, to your point, there would have to be tranches where 25% of the 30% would have to be at 30% MFI, and the balance would have to be at 50% MFI. And that's, again, those are minimums.
Well, the city has never applied that statute as it stands on its face. Whenever it's disposed of a large tract, it's always reduced the amount of affordable housing that it provides. So why is that?
I'm not sure I follow the question, but I can point to another example. Waterfront Station is another one of my projects where it produced exactly what I said, 30% of the, 450, roughly, I forget now, 450 units. 30%, I think 156 are affordable according to the regime or outline that I gave before.
Well, see, Tacoma and McMillan are far less than 30%. And so if the waterfront is going to be at 30%, that's going to be a first. But I really sort of wanted to kind of hear what's planned for this. And I think you said you're going to take that up at a later date.
Yeah, I mean, Laura, I think I'll say two things. The first is that both David Meny from the council member's office and Daniel from DEMPED have said the plan is to require 30% of the units will be affordable housing. The second, and I appreciate what you're saying, right? Which is sometimes promises are made and then they're not ultimately fulfilled. I think that's one of the things that we're, one of the reasons why we're all engaged and want to make sure that good outcomes are achieved here. And then the second thing I said is that, gosh, the discussion around inclusionary zoning, affordable housing, the different kind of strategies, the social housing component that folks have referenced tonight is absolutely worthy of a further conversation. I don't think we'll probably be able to do justice to it tonight, given kind of how much time we've already been spending. So I'd love for you to be engaged in that conversation as we get it scheduled. And we'll be looking to have that happen at one of the upcoming Economic Development Committee meetings or in a kind of a break-off phone call. And David, I see your hand is not up. That was Laura still. So yeah, if we can kind of keep talking about it, Laura, that'd be great. But we've heard your question. I think it's a good question.
Okay.
I will say, Macmillan, I didn't hear the other project you mentioned, but Macmillan, it's not my project, so I can't speak to it in detail. However, I do know that it goes back over a decade and the law has changed during that time. And I think it was 2014. David, if he's still on, may know. I think it was 2014 that new legislation was passed where a 30% requirement came into being.
Yeah, the
Before
projects that were named, I think were in some cases well before that requirement existed.
Yeah.
Great. All right, Laura, thank you so much. Karen Gull, I see your hand is up, and then Krishna, and then we're going to wrap.
Okay, good evening, David. It's always a pleasure to have you in here. And David, Daniel, excuse me, Daniel and David. My question is, because social housing is always a core subject that has come up, and I'm always interested in seeing the projects that social housing has worked for in the District of Columbia. When we have these discussions, I think that it will, and since we're going into an educational discussion, as Matt had mentioned, I think that it would be great to have the projects that are successful in Washington, D.C. Listed in our purview when we're doing these discussions. So we see what works, what successes are out there, and if it's currently any projects underway that is still successful, the term, how long they've been in play, and what future projects the district has in the works that they are considering around social housing, especially because it's a high interest in this area. It's been brought up a number of times with 1617 and also possibly with the Reeve Center. I know I've been on board for quite some time for every reiteration of the Reeve Center, and I certainly, and I'm sure with Rita Bright having that facility that just unfortunately is no longer, the Terrell is not going to move forward, and I'm sure that that's going to come up again. So I would love to see what the projections are for social housing in the district and what has worked in the past as a success. Thank you, Daniel. I'm going to help.
Great. Karen, thank you. And I think that's good.
Thank
I
you.
think that's, good guidance. And I know that the social housing topic has come up. The other thing that I think would be good to add to that discussion, and David hit on this a little bit, is how are we defining social housing? Because I certainly have learned a lot about the Montgomery County approach. David highlighted a couple of things that DC is already doing differently. I've read a big chunk of the auditor's report that talks about where IZ is failing. So I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about the definition of social housing. And there's a question about kind of goal and structure. So let's kind of figure out some time to how we want to organize that and when we can hold that discussion. Krishna,
Sure.
first to you, then to Howard, and then we will wrap up our agenda.
Matt, it was just a little bit add into that because of the way it was structured, as you mentioned, the affordability aspect of it as to who's going to be responsible for paying and who's going to hold, how it's really going to lend itself towards affordability, and if there's going to be any particular people who are going to take on more weight and have more privileges. So those things are part of that conversation. So just so when we do receive information that we're getting the full realm of information, that's really, really important. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, no, I think that's great. I'd love your help actually in framing up kind of the specifics that we're asking for. So thanks. Krishna, you're muted.
Sorry, just a quick point of order. Can we just keep the questions on Rita Bright for now?
Yes. Howard.
Well, if there are no questions about Rita Bright, I have some points for the new business section.
Yeah, let's wrap this up, and then we're going to go to other items. So Daniel, thank you for the marathon. And we'll be back in touch, and we appreciate it. Benita, I still see you're still there, so thank you for the Reeves update. David, many thank you for attending and joining us and sharing a lot of insight and a lot of history. So
Everyone.
Thank you all so much. With new business closed, any other business? Howard.
Yes, and I will be brief. I just have some, as I mentioned to you, probably cryptically, Matt, I just wanted to raise a couple of procedural issues about how resolutions in general get handled by the ANC and by extension, this committee. I noticed that the agenda materials for the ANC's May 1st meeting did not contain any draft versions of any of the resolutions that were being considered at the meeting, which seemed to be a first for me. I'm hoping that's not the way things are going to go forward. And it's really important, I think, for the community to be able to see the drafts of what's going to be discussed at the meetings. So I just wanted to put a pitch in for that.
Yeah, no, Howard, I agree. So we've made a couple of changes. We've made a couple of changes this year in kind of administrative approach and structure. One of the changes is that we now have a committee of the whole meeting that happens the week before the meeting, so that the commissioners, it's a public meeting. There's no opportunity for the public to comment, but it is a public meeting and people can observe. And so the purpose of that was to try to do a better job amongst the commissioners to clarify the agenda items, what was coming up, make sure that everybody was clear on where things were headed. And so that I think has helped a lot with transparency amongst the commissioners, so that people are coming to the full commission meeting where we will be voting with a lot more clarity on what's happening. The second big change is that we are trying very hard to provide a tremendous amount of detail and specificity in the agenda itself. So, you know, and frankly, I'm the one with our chairperson, Miguel Trindade Duramo, because I'm also the secretary. In addition to this role, I'm the secretary of the commission. And so I'm spending a lot of time beating the bushes, so to speak, to get all of the ABCA cases that were coming up that were viewed, all of the zoning items that are coming forward, making sure that all of that is in the agenda so that people can see exactly what we'll be talking about. We've also, as a part of that, reintroduced the consent agenda so that there is kind of a batch of things that are discussed in the committee that don't require kind of formal deliberation amongst the commission, but that we want to make sure we have a vote on. So there's been a bunch of those changes. This last month, as a result of like implementing all of that, we missed getting the resolutions into the packet. It is not intended to be the practice of the commission to not share that information in advance. And so, you know, part of what had actually happened is that some of those resolutions weren't finalized until like the Monday, Tuesday before the meeting. We're working really hard to make sure that all the resolutions are ready to go with the opening packet. And if not, they're at least provided the 24 hours in advance. But the plan is to provide all resolutions in writing as a part of the agenda packet. And this month was us, frankly, just falling short.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I know it's a heck of a lot of work that you engage in, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, look. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to move to my second point.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the second kind of concern I had was that at that meeting, one of the resolutions that came up was with respect to the Neighborhood Management Authority for Columbia Heights.
Yes.
Seems to me that that resolution should have come to this committee. It's just like we dealt with that similar issue for U Street, and it's an economic development issue. So I would urge that subject relevant resolutions go to their appropriate committees.
Yeah, I will chalk that up to two things. I don't disagree with you, which is saying I agree with you, but I'm still kind of thinking. So there's two thoughts on that, or maybe two explanations. The first is that when that resolution was originally presented to me as a concept, it was presented as something that was outside of our ANC. And that it included some of the SMDs. Actually, I guess it overlaps our ANC, but it included a couple of the single member districts on the northern edge of Commission 1B. And so our chair of the commission, along with the single member district commissioners who were whose single member districts that touched, kind of got together, had some conversations with the Commission 1A, Jeremy Sherman, and kind of worked through it and said, hey, this is something that we think is a good idea, and ultimately reached the resolution language that they did. But I hear your point, right? There's serious overlap with the work that we've been doing to review the Neighborhood Management Authority for U Street, and the resolution that we drafted related to the place management entity. And so I will strive in the future to kind of make sure that my antenna are up more, to pay attention to things that might be more of an overlap with us. I mean, I will give you actually one of my own, which is that Lidroit Park has a green space that we are looking to write a resolution on relative to naming it. And I have not talked to Commissioner Holden about whether it should go through the Transportation Parks Committee, or
Yes,
whether
it
it's
should.
something that can come from the single member district. And I need to have that conversation with him. But what happens is that something that folks are trying to move on with some alacrity can have to wait for another 30 to 45 days as it goes through these different committees. So
In general, I don't think there should be single member district resolutions. I think everything should go through a subject matter committee. I'm not going to say everything, but nearly everything.
yeah.
There may be
And
some issues about naming that park that are relevant to issues somewhere else in the ANC about naming, for example. That's why it's important.
I think that's going to be one of the discussions, because I think the commission has at this point entertained the idea of both resolutions that would come from committee and resolutions that would come from single member district commissioners. And so I think we're probably pursuing parallel paths, but I think that's a good point. And I will raise that as a discussion item at our next committee of the whole, because I think it's a discussion that's worth having. And your tenure and experience is bringing it to the fore. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, Karen Gall.
Thank you, Matt. And I really appreciate how we're bringing up the question about overlap, because the NMA and then also the bid resolution that we spent a lot of time on. I was looking forward to seeing some more information about that, to see how we're carrying on with the process. I like status reports based on how we're proceeding when we have these intersecting agendas that tend to come up in our community. And I I don't know, in regards to our processing of our agendas for our committee, as well as any outstanding items that may have that we didn't carry over into the next meeting. If we could have a little bit more, a little bit more information. And I know that you're doing dual roles with doing a secretary role, because there's a lot of stuff that we do know that we need to have some shoring up on with the our ABA APCA committee reporting. It's just little stuff, but I think you guys are doing a great job. But that bid and M&A thing is really a big thorn that I really think we need to address. And then also, I know that we're having a committee meeting that you said was optional, and I really do tell you, because I know that the location is not ADA compliant, because I do, I go places and I could tell you what isn't, and I've been there and it isn't. But I would like to have that meeting on the comp plan in a place that we all can meet together. So that's my new business. Thank you.
Okay, got it. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to having a chance just to do some brainstorming. I think it's important that we all get together. Karen, I'll reach out to you separately for some meeting location recommendations so that we get a place that that will work. And I think to your first point around the bid, I welcome feedback from this group. Whether it's email, whether you kind of text me or call me. Part of what I've found in our first essentially 5 months of meeting is that all of our meetings have been devoted to these big meaty topics, which haven't left a lot of time for what I would call like regular and routine updates on standing business. And so, I'd love to get input from this group around what are kind of the regular topics that we want to make sure that are standing. The bid definitely would rise to the top as one of them. But I'm trying to balance between being able to kind of go into depth on certain things like the DemPed updates that we had, the NMA and the bid discussions that we had, and at the same time being able to do justice to kind of a broad range of topics without without taking us for 3 hours. And part of the reason why we go long is because we've got tremendous community engagement, and I absolutely appreciate that. That's what a big part of why we're all here and doing this. So thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. Frank, hoping the final item, and then we can adjourn for the night.
Yes, just to touch base on the comp plan
Yeah.
as just a tool for folks who haven't been involved in the conversation, haven't been in any of the meetings, haven't signed up to register for, is it Comp 2050, I think, .gov or .dc.gov. If you haven't registered for that, I'm frantically looking for my email, but there's 2 panels coming up, and they are both webinars. One's on the 30th of May, and one is on the I think the 4th of June for anyone who feels like they would like to or have some time and want to take a jump start and or extra time devoted to learning about the comp plan and where it's going and some planning that is currently undertaken by the Office of Planning. I stopped in. I've been to a few seminars and stopped in to see the open table that they hosted up in Mount Pleasant last week. There were the 2 Alexes. Commissioner, you're probably familiar with at least one, if not 2 of the Alexes involved. One is the Ward 1 comp plan guy, and his last name eludes me. But one was also the sort of a civic engagement guy, the community association guy. So I was speaking to both of them because one, they hadn't reached out to my association in my backyard, and I was curious why they hadn't been and what kind of process they were undertaking to reach out to community associations in some type of orchestrated format, email list, etc. And he just said to send him an email and he could get somebody added from my association on that list. But then secondly, I believe that ANC's, in terms of part of the process, speaking to the other Alex, the Ward 1 Alex, for the comp plan, he said that maybe they were looking at direct contact. I don't know if you've heard differently, Commissioner, but with ANCs towards the end of the summer, early fall, September or such. So just as a generic, soft piece of information, not confirmed in writing, but maybe we'll be called on at that point to give something in writing.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. And the Alex, the Ward 1 Alex, was in attendance at the commission meeting at the end of or the beginning of this month, the May meeting, and they were the guest speakers. They delivered a presentation. I think many of you were there. I will forward that presentation to all of you, which includes their contact information, but it also includes the dates and the events that Frank was referencing, and some information about how to register for those. So that'd be great. The other thing I'm going to do, and we'll figure out maybe how we can set up a shared drive for this, but there are a handful of planning documents that I have been referencing. You guys might all have these already, but like there's the Duke small area plan, It's a very thorough document. There's the update, they call it the ASAP. There's a bunch of like really good, there's the Mid-City chapter from the last comp plan, which includes this area plus others. But I'm going to send those around, and that way folks can start to build a library. And please share the things that you've got, right? I don't have the end all be all. I've got the things that I've got, and I'm looking for other things. But I'm trying really hard to educate myself on kind of what are we starting from. That helps us, I think, then give a focus on what was in the original comp plan that maybe we say, hey, this is still a great idea. Let's just keep working on it. Hey, this wasn't considered in the earlier comp plan. Let's add it. Or things have changed and we don't really need this to be a focus anymore. But I think if we've got an existing framework that we can reference, that might help us be more efficient. At the same time that we're learning some of the same vernacular and history that our colleagues in the Office of Planning may already have. Cool. I want to just pause here before we wrap up and thank everybody. We have been running 2.5-hour meetings every single time. It's a tremendous amount of dedication from this group. The other thing I want to thank you for is just your tremendous intellect and commitment to all of this work. Krishna and I have talked a little bit over the last week, and he's just got so much history, as does Howard, as does Karen, as does Frank, as does Tanya. Ian and I are new this year, but Ian, I know you were very much involved in the 16-17 discussions. So I just want to thank you all for bringing your dedication and your history and your knowledge to this. I think it makes a tremendous difference as we try to, do the work we're doing and to represent all the voices that, live in and around us. So thank you for all that. And I look forward to seeing you all on Monday of next week. I'll connect with Karen on a location. I'll be back to you all, and the first beer or glass of wine, Tanya, is on me. So we can kind of sit down and maybe spend a little bit of time getting to know each other and enjoying each other's company, as well as doing some good work. So thank you all. With that said, I adjourn us at 9:36. Good luck with the rest of your week and have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend. Glad you remembered.
Bye,
My only
all.
words for the night.
Thanks, Daniel.
All right. Good night.